Warning, this chapter contains adult content which is not fit for listeners under 18 years of age. I will be recording it as a separate segment for members only. Starborn Café by Miss Yuki 1990. Chapter 18. Bonding. Hadoven sighed as he rested his forehead against the window of his and Thor's room. They returned to New York some 3 days ago, and things calmed down somewhat. All of them knew that there was a war looming on the horizon. They could all feel it. Hadoven could feel it. Winter was slowly turning into spring. Snow was melting away, but instead of clear blue skies, all that Hadoven could see were dark clouds.
"How do you feel?"
The voice of his beloved pulled Ven out of his musings. He smiled and turned to face Thor. The god of thunder stood in the doorway, leaning against the doorframe with his strong arms crossed over his muscled chest. A small loving smile crossed Thor's face when Hadoven smiled at him, and he pushed away from the doorframe. "I am as well as I can be. My magic is slowly building up. I should be back to my full strength in no time."
"I know that, my most beautiful one."
Thor pulled Hadoven into a hug once he was close enough.
"What I don't know is how you feel."
Hadoven sighed. He wrapped his arms around Thor's waist and buried his face in Thor's chest. Worried, scared, confused. Thor hugged him tighter and buried his face in Hadoven's sweet-smelling hair. "I don't know what Loki is planning. Asgard is still cut off from us. I can't—"
"Hush,"
Thor whispered and kissed the crown of Hadoven's head.
"We can do nothing about that, beloved. All we can do is wait and prepare."
Hadoven nodded against Thor's chest and leaned back to smile up at him. "You always know the right words to say." Thor leaned down against him.
"I know that I need to keep you safe, my Hadoven, my spring."
"I will return back to my strength soon enough, Thor. You don't need to worry so much." Thor frowned.
"My mind knows that, but my heart—"
He looked in Hadoven's eyes, and the slightly smaller man frowned when he saw the shadow of pain in Thor's stormy silvery blue orbs.
"My heart remembers your pain. It remembers the moment when I held you bloody, beaten and broken in my arms. It remembers that pain. I cannot feel that again, Hadoven. I cannot lose you."
"And you won't," Hadoven whispered and cupped Thor's face with soft, warm hands. "I promise I will be more careful. I won't let anything take me from your side again." Thor tilted his head to the side and kissed the middle of Hadoven's right palm.
"And I will not let you leave my side."
Hadoven smiled lovingly at him.
"I know."
"Thor?" The two parted slowly and looked at the doorway, with Thor smiling at the woman that stood there.
"Ha! Jane! I believe the two of you haven't met yet."
Thor placed his hand on the small of Hadoven's back and led him closer to Jane, who shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. Hadoven looked at her in interest, with his head tilted slightly to the side. "It's a pleasure to meet you." He offered his hand to the woman. "I'm Hadoven Sigurdsson." She accepted his hand and smiled at him. "The pleasure is mine. I'm Jane Foster Brightman." "I heard a lot about you, Miss Foster Brightman." Hadoven looked at Thor, who smiled at him lovingly. Thor told Ven about Jane one night while they were sitting in Hadoven's living room enjoying the quiet of a peaceful evening. "You were of great help to Thor the first time he came to Earth," Hadoven commented, and Jane blushed furiously, looking at the ground, afraid to look in Hadoven's eyes. She knew Thor and Hadoven were together. It couldn't be missed. She looked up when Hadoven chuckled and frowned in confusion at Hadoven's gentle, understanding smile. "I know everything, and I hold nothing against you." She raised eyebrows at him and looked at Thor. The god of thunder smiled at her and shrugged his shoulders.
"There are barely any secrets left between Ven and I,"
Thor explained, and Jane nodded. "I've heard about you." She looked at Hadoven. "I just didn't think there was really someone in the world as understanding as I was told you were." Hadoven shrugged his shoulders and threw Thor a small teasing smirk. "I saw a lot of things. I've gotten used to many things some people wouldn't accept." "I'm just glad Thor found someone, Mr. Ven," he corrected her, and she smiled shyly at him. "You can call me Ven." "Then you can call me Jane."
"Was there anything you needed, Jane?"
Thor asked, and she nodded at him. "Actually, there was. Steve and I found a way to open the bifrost."
"What?"
Thor breathed out, and Hadoven grabbed Thor's hand. "Take us to the lab," Ben said, and Jane nodded. They rushed down the hallways of the Avengers Tower and ran into the lab, making every head turn towards them. Thor, Ven! We've just received excellent news! Steve grinned at them. News? From whom? Hadovan asked and looked around. From me. Hadovan turned on his heel when a familiar voice came from behind him. Odd! He cried out in joy and enveloped the see-through form of his longtime friend into a loving hug. Most of the people in the room raised eyebrows in wonder, while Thor simply chuckled and shook his head. You can actually touch her, Bruce muttered from beside Thor.
I should have known it would be possible for him.
Thor's words made everyone raise eyebrows at him. How come you are here? You shouldn't be able to... Thor broke the mirror when they came looking for you. I am now free to enter your world for a short time. Erd explained, and Nervin looked at Thor, who offered his love a small shrug.
What news do you have for us?
Thor asked, and Erd winked at Hadovan, who merely shook his head, lips tilting up into a small smile. King Odin the Allfather has defeated the Chitauri armies. Hadovan and Thor breathed sighs of relief. There is only one problem. The Tesseract was destroyed. What? Thor snapped. Hadovan turned to look at everyone, while Erd continued to explain everything to them. King Odin used it to protect Asgard. We do not know how it happened, but it did.
The Bifrost?
Thor asked. The Bifrost is intact, but no one at Asgard is powerful enough to open the bridge right now. King Odin was weakened by the Tesseract. He will need time to recover. But we need to open the Rainbow Bridge, Sif cried out. You have two of the most powerful beings in the known realms right here. Thor and Hadovan looked at Erd with magic frowns. Who? Jane asked. Why, Ven and Thor, of course. Their combined power will be more than enough to open the bridge. Erd spoke as though it was the most obvious thing in the world.
Hadovan is not yet up to his full power,
Thor said. Erd giggled at that while Hadovan blushed. Even at a quarter of his power, Hadovan would be able to hold his own against the mightiest opponent. You give me too much credit, Erd, Hadovan said. Everyone was looking at him with surprised expressions, including Thor. You don't give yourself enough credit, sweetness. What do you estimate your powers are at? She asked, and Hadovan's blush deepened. Some 57 to 59%, he muttered. Well, Erd clapped her hands with a wide smile. Like I said, more than enough.
Will it drain him further?
Thor asked. I'm not made out of glass, Hadovan muttered. You sure looked like that a week ago. Tony counted, and Hadovan shot him a glare. Tony raised a hand in surrender, and the others rolled their eyes at him. It would drain him only slightly if he were to do it alone. With the two of you working together, it won't weaken either one of you too much. Hadovan nodded. What do we need to do?
Hadovan!
But we need to open the bridge. Hadovan interrupted his beloved, making the god of thunder frown. We need all the information we can get, and I don't doubt that King Odin would agree to help us against the Chitauri. They are a threat to us all. He is the right Thor, Sif said, and Hadovan looked at her. She smirked at him, and Hadovan raised an eyebrow at her. She knows you are with Thor, sweetness, Erd whispered in Ven's mind. She is very amused by the fact that Thor has a man for a destined. Hadovan chuckled, making everyone look at him in confusion. So, he looked at Erd. What do we need to do? This won't be easy, she warned, and everyone nodded at her. This is what you need to do. Are you sure? Bruce asked for the 100th time. They were on top of the Avengers Tower. Tony and Thor were getting ready to fly, and Bruce was talking with Hadovan outside of the chopper. Yes, I'm sure, Bruce. I haven't flown for years. I miss it. But you'd be safer in the chopper. Bruce almost whined, and Hadovan laughed. Everyone except Thor was looking at him as though he was insane ever since he said he would fly with Thor and Tony. Trust me, that's the best and safest way for me to travel.
We should get going,
Thor said, and spun Mjolnir lightly. Hadovan chuckled and pushed his hand into his back pocket. A second later, a beautiful broom was in his hand. You're flying on that, Tony asked. With a smirk, Hadovan jumped on the broom and then a circle around them. Trust me, you'll be eating my dust before you know it. I'll see you later. He called out, waved, and darted off before anyone could say another word. He's really a wizard, Jay muttered in shock. Thor chuckled, shook his head, and saluted everyone.
We shall meet on the mark.
He flew off after Hudvin. "See you there," Tony said, closing his visor, and flew off. "We had better get going," Clint said. "Sure," Natasha muttered. "This is insane. First a god and now a wizard." Jane spoke as they entered the chapel and took the seats. "Trust me," Sif drawled and grinned at Jane almost insanely. "You have seen nothing yet." Once they landed the chopper and got out, the Avengers, plus Sif and Jane, raised eyebrows at the scene that they stumbled upon. Thor and Tony were speaking with Hudvin, who was sitting sideways on his broom, floating about 1.5 feet in the air. The tips of his boots were barely brushing against the grassy ground. "About time!" Tony called out. "They were about to start without you." "Good thing we finally arrived. I don't want to miss this," Clint said and crossed his arms over his chest. They were currently located at the place where Sif arrived on Earth. The mark of the bifrost had faded somewhat, but it was still visible. "How are we going to do this?" Natasha asked. "You won't do anything." Hudvin hopped off the broom, shrunk it in his hand, and put it back in his bucket.
"You shouldn't stand too close," Thor warned their friends. "We do not want you to get hurt."
He looked at Hudvin.
"Are you ready?"
"As ready as I can be," Hudvin said, and looked at the others. "We don't know what could happen. If we pulled through the Bifrost, I want you to go back to the Avengers Tower and keep getting ready. I don't know if we'll be able to come back right away."
"And I have no doubt that Mother will wish to see you,"
Thor muttered, and Hudvin winced.
"Anyway," he sighed, "wish us luck."
"You mean wish you luck," Bruce said with a smirk, and Hudvin fought against the urge to stick his tongue out. He settled for a glare before Thor placed his hand on his shoulder.
"Let's go."
They nodded at everyone and walked towards the middle of the circle. "What carefully," Sif said, and everyone spared her a glance before they looked back at Thor and Hudvin. "This will be a sight to remember." Thor and Hudvin turned to each other once they were in the middle of the circle. "I've never done magic of these proportions," Hudvin admitted, and Thor smiled at him.
"I have never done magic at all."
Hudvin chuckled, and Thor offered him his hands. Hudvin placed his shaking ones above Thor's. "Everything or nothing," he muttered, and they closed their eyes. For a few moments, nothing happened. Their quiet audience shifted in their places while they waited for something to happen. Tony was about to say something when all of a sudden the wind stopped. "It's starting." To everyone's surprise, Jane was the one who spoke. She looked at the sky, and everyone followed her gaze. The sky started to darken with clouds. "Everyone, you better hold on," Jane slowly lowered to the ground. Everyone looked at Hudvin and Thor as they followed her example. When the pair's hands were joined, sparks of power started to snap and flash. The wind started to pick up speed. Thunder roared in the sky, and the circle beneath Thor and Hudvin's feet started to glow. "Hold on!" Bruce shouted and shifted into Hulk as a hurricane-like wind started to blow around them. A wave of raw power exploded from Hudvin and Thor, but it didn't spread further than the lines of the circle. Everyone's breath hitched in their throats when Hudvin's and Thor's eyes snapped open.
"Heimdall!"
they called out as one, and their power surged into the sky, shaking the very foundations of the earth. Everyone closed their eyes as bright light blinded them, and were it not for Hulk, who protected Steve, Natasha, Clint, and Jane, they would have been pushed away. Tony and Steve barely managed to resist the surge, and even with it, they were pushed back a few feet. Once it all settled, the sky cleared almost instantly, and Hudvin and Thor were gone. "Well," Tony said, and his visor snapped up. "I'd say it worked." If Thor didn't catch him, Hudvin would have met the floor the moment they landed in the golden dome of the Bifrost.
"Are you well?"
"I am. I was just surprised," Ven said and straightened.
"My lord."
They looked up when someone called for Thor, and Hudvin assumed that the man dressed in the golden armor was Heimdall.
"Heimdall! Am I glad to see you!"
Thor pulled the stoic man into a manly hug.
"We missed your presence here, your highness. When Lady Erd informed us that you had a way to help us open the bridge, I hurried back,"
Heimdall said and looked at Hudvin. The wizard bowed at Heimdall from his waist with his arms at his sides, and the keeper frowned. "I am honored to meet you, gatekeeper," Hudvin said and straightened.
"The honor is mine, Hudvin Sigurdsson."
Heimdall bowed his head.
"Come, there are many who wish to see you."
He spoke to Thor, and they moved for the door, with Hudvin keeping slightly to the back. Once they came out, everything turned into a cacophony of cheers and sounds. Thor found himself enveloped in many hugs. His back was patted many times, and when he found himself in front of his mother and father, heavy silence settled among them.
Father, mother.
He bowed in front of them.
It is good to see you in good health, my son.
Frigga pulled Thor into a loving hug, while Odin smiled at his son proudly. He seemed well enough. Everyone appeared to be well, in fact, and Thor smiled widely as he turned around. His smile faded, but he couldn't locate Hadaven immediately.
What is it, son?
Odin asked and took a step closer to stand to Thor's right, while Frigga stood to his left with her hands wrapped around Thor's strong forearm.
You look as though you lost something,
Fandral teased. Volstagg and Hogun stood each on one side of Fandral with almost matching smirks on their faces. Thor's face brightened when he located Hadaven some 30 feet away, standing behind Heimdall.
Everyone, I wish for you to meet someone.
Thor spoke excitedly, making the warrior three frown and move to the side, while the king and queen turned to where Thor was looking. Thor moved forward and spread his arm in Hadaven's direction. Hadaven smiled and walked forward. Once he was a little away from Thor, he got down on his knee. He placed a left hand on his bent knee, fisted his right, and placed it on the ground, bowing his head low. His braided hair fell over one shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice was strong.
It is an honor to stand in your presence, O father.
Odin looked at Thor. Once he saw the love glowing in his son's eyes, his old heart warmed. Frigga took Odin's hand in hers, and he looked down at her. Odin could see that his son had found true love, for Thor had the same look in his eyes Odin himself had every time he would look at his beautiful wife. He nodded at Frigga, let go of her hand, and took a few steps forward.
The honor is ours, Hadaven Sigurdsson.
He spoke warmly.
Rise. You do not need to be on your knees in front of us.
The warrior three gaped at that, while Thor and Frigga exchanged pleased smiles. Hadaven stood up, but didn't raise his head. Odin chuckled and stepped closer. He placed two of his fingers under Hadaven's chin and pushed his head up. Once his good eye met Hadaven's glowing emerald orbs, he nodded, and his lips tilted into a fatherly smile.
My son has chosen well. I can see your strength and power, Hadaven, guardian of the sanctuary.
Hadaven smiled, and Odin lowered his hand.
I am glad to see you are well, and I congratulate you on your victory against your enemy.
Odin nodded.
Thank you, child. Come, we have some knowledge of what transpired on Earth. We shall eat while you tell us everything.
As you wish, my lord,
Hadaven said. Frigga walked over to him and to Ben's surprise wrapped her arms around his elbow as Odin turned his back on them, leading them over to the horses.
I cannot wait to get to know you better, my dear Hadaven.
She spoke warmly.
I have heard many great things about you from Verdandi.
I'm sure they are all exaggerated,
Hadaven drawled with a small smirk, and Frigga giggled. In the meantime, Thor found himself under an attack of his friends.
On, Thor!
Volstagg murmured teasingly, and Thor rolled his eyes.
Wait until you get to know him,
he answered proudly.
But the man! Thor!
Fandral moaned. Sure, he has a woman's beauty, but...
You should hope he did not hear you,
Thor warned, and Fandral raised an eyebrow at him. They reached their horses, and Thor looked at them. A part of him was happy that there were 2 additional horses waiting for them. The other cursed it. It had been a while since he had last allowed himself to hold Hadaven.
You say I look much like a woman, Lord Fandral.
Hadaven called over to them as he picked a dark black stallion. Fandral paled when his eyes met Hadaven's. Odin smirked, while Frigga elegantly covered her lips with her hand to hide a grin. Hogun smirked, while Volstagg grinned widely, and Thor walked over to Hadaven to steal a kiss from him.
I did not mean... Oh, I know very well what you meant.
Hadaven spoke lightly. He mounted the horse with ease, and an excited look flashed in his eyes when the horse neighed and climbed on his back legs.
If you wish, you can test my strength, once you've recovered, of course.
I am well enough!
Fandral snapped as they mounted their horses. He was blushing, and his blush deepened when Hadaven smirked at him.
We shall see. It seems as though we shall have an amusing evening.
Thor grinned as he stopped his horse beside Hadaven's.
It will take some time for dinner to be served, Odin said. Maybe you shall have the chance to test your strength against Mage Hadaven sooner than you think, Sir Fandral.
Fandral's eyes opened wide. Volstagg looked excited, and Hogun looked interested. interested.
What say you, then?
Thor asked.
Do you feel up to a little duel?
I have been feeling up to a little warm-up for a few days now. Ven spoke thoughtfully, glancing at Fandral with eyes darkened with excitement and lips tilted up into a smirk. This could prove to be good exercise. Thor chuckled and shook his head.
Of course.
Let us go. We have much to discuss. After, of course, Hadoven and Fandral dissolved their little measuring contest.
Frigga teased. Fandral was about to complain, but Odin pushed his horse into a gallop, and everyone followed after him, with everyone but Fandral either laughing or smirking.
Welcome into the great hall of Asgard,
Thor said as they entered the hall, and Hadoven looked around with eyes filled with wonder. It is absolutely wonderful! He looked at Thor, and Ven's lips spread in that wide, beautiful smile Thor had come to love more than anything else. Thor, your home is beautiful! Thor wrapped his arms around Hadoven's waist and pulled him into a kiss. Volstagg and Hogun exchanged amused smirks. Odin and Frigga smiled at each other, while Fandral looked paler than before.
It shall be our home one day, means Starna.
Thor spoke so only Hadoven heard him, and the wizard laughed quietly, nudging Thor's nose with his arm. Of course, Hadoven murmured, and Thor smirked at him.
I shall go and order dinner to be served to us. Do not start anything without me.
Frigga said, and her eyes glimmered as she glanced at Hadoven. Worry not, my queen. Hadoven bowed his head at her. We shall start nothing. He looked at Fandral with a smirk. Do we have to do this? Fandral asked, trying to sound easygoing. I would hate to ruin dinner for you, Mage Sigerson. Hadoven chuckled at Thor smirked. Trust me, Lord Fandral. Little could destroy dinner for me. Ven spoke and walked further down the great hall, looking around in interest with Thor following him. It would be an understatement to say that Fandral didn't like being brushed aside like that. Odin chuckled and followed after Thor and Hadoven, while Volstagg and Hogun rounded on their blonde friend. You would do well to apologize, Fandral, Hogun warned wisely. No man of Thor is supposed to be weak. Please, Hogun, look at him! Fandral cried out in outrage and showed at Hadoven, who was listening carefully to something Odin was telling him about one of the great tapestries that hanging on the walls. He looks like a woman with those delicate limbs and lithe body. And yet he moves like an experienced warrior. Hogun's eyes followed Hadoven's every move. He seems aware of everything, and his shoulders are tense, even though he appears relaxed. You are looking too much into him, Fandral spoke haughtily. He's just a little human who happens to be able to use magic. I fought much stronger men.
I would not be so sure if I were you, Lord Fandral.
Frigga spoke from behind, then making Fandral jump in his place.
Hadoven is much stronger than he seems. She walked beside them. Dinner shall be ready in half an hour, she announced. Maybe we should wait until after dinner.
There is no need for that, Fandral said as they walked over. Half an hour should be more than enough. They stopped in front of the others, and Fandral looked at Hadoven, thinking his confident words managed to throw Hadoven off a little, only to find the wizard smirking as he leaned against Thor's side with Thor's arm around his waist. Half an hour should be far more than enough, do you not think? Hadoven asked and looked at Thor.
I believe so. After all, when we last dueled, you brought me down in 45 minutes.
At Thor's answer, Fandral gaped, but quickly snapped his mouth shut. I believe you were correct. Hadoven smirked at Fandral in a positively evil way. In some ways, Hadoven reminded them of Loki in that moment. I shall enjoy this greatly, he muttered.
Then what are we waiting for?
Odin said. Frigga placed her hand on Odin's offered elbow. Thor kissed Hadoven's forehead, making Hadoven sigh lightly.
Will you need a sword, means was?
Thor asked as Volstagg and Hogun patted Fandral's back and moved to stand with the king and queen. No, Hadoven smirked. If I remember correctly, I didn't need one when I fought you. At that, Fandral tensed up even more. He quickly pushed it all back and stood tall. He was one of the Warrior Three. He would not be beaten by a human.
You're right.
Thor squeezed Hadoven's shoulder and smiled at Fandral on his way to join his father, mother, and friends. Good luck. Do not worry, my friend. I shall not hurt your human too much. Fandral drawled and drew his sword from its scabbard.
I was talking to you, my thoughtless friend,
Thor called over, and Fandral tensed up even more. Hadovan chuckled, took 2 steps back, crouched, and raised his arms leisurely.
Are you certain you want to do this?
Fandral sneered at him, making Hadovan chuckle shortly.
Since this is the first time we've met, I am feeling inclined to forgive your thoughtless words and ignore your challenge.
Then drawled, eyes flashing a brighter shade of green.
I have not challenged you.
Fandral spoke in confusion, and a shiver ran down his spine when Hadovan's eyes darkened.
You've implied that I am not worthy of my destiny, Hadovan spoke lowly. It is my duty to defend my honor.
Should Thor not be the one to defend your honor? Fandral sneered, and Hadovan smirked at him.
Trust me,
Hadovan whispered and crouched lower. Fandral's eyes widened when Hadovan's hair and clothes danced slowly in a slight breeze.
He knows better than to try and fight my battles.
Again! Odin ordered before Fandral could say anything, and the warrior charged at Hadovan thoughtlessly. In a second, he found himself on his back with his own sword pointed at his throat.
Do not underestimate me.
Hadovan growled lowly, and his eyes flashed for a second. He threw Fandral's sword on the ground, then took a few steps back.
Get up! We are not yet done.
Fandral growled. He would not let a human disgrace him. That was a lucky shot! There was no way a warrior of Asgard could be brought down by a human wizard. He charged at Hadovan with everything he had, but the dark-haired wizard twisted and turned around him, avoiding his blade as though it was nothing. Hadovan looked as though he was dancing. To add insult to injury, his eyes were closed, and he kept his hands on his back, his index fingers hooked in the loops of his black trousers.
This shall be over quickly,
Thor murmured, and his friends looked at him in surprise.
Ven is used to fighting more unpredictable opponents, and many of them at once. Fandral is good, but not good enough to pose a threat to Ven. You knew this would happen,
Hogan concluded, and Thor nodded.
Fandral is like a brother to me, but he has a lot to learn.
You have learned a lot as well, my son. Odin spoke, and Thor smiled at his father.
I have, father. Midgard has taught me a lot.
Thor looked at Hadovan as he spoke, feeling a shiver go down his body when Hadovan escaped Fandral's blade by an inch.
Hadovan taught me a lot.
Fandral grinned. With every slash, he was getting closer to cutting Hadovan. You would teach that little wizard not to underestimate a warrior of Asgard! He aimed for Hadovan's chest, and Hadovan's eyes snapped open. A feeling of victory overtook Fandral, but it was of short lasting.
I warned you not to underestimate me!
To Fandral's shock, Hadovan grabbed the blade of the sword with his bare hand, pulling Fandral forward and jump.
That is his trademark move!
Thor spoke excitedly as Hadovan jumped up, hooked his feet under Fandral's armpits, and brought the both of them down. Fandral's sword met the ground with a clang, and his breath was kicked out of him. He choked up when Hadovan grabbed his throat and aimed his right hand at Fandral's heart, nails sharp as a blade.
Do you yield?
Hadovan growled lowly. His eyes were dark green, and his power was rolling off of him in waves, making shivers run up and down Fandral's body. Fandral was in a state of disbelief. That was twice now in less than 15 minutes that he found himself on his back, his sword out of his hand, and Hadovan threatening to take his life.
Do you yield?
Hadovan roared, and the whole hall shook with his power-laced voice.
I yield!
Hadovan snorted. His nails turned back to normal right in front of Fandral's eyes. With practically no effort at all, Ven climbed to his feet, took a few steps back, and offered his hand to Fandral. For a few moments, Fandral just stared at Hadovan, leaning back on his elbows. Fandral had been wrong. That much was obvious. Now the question was if he was man enough to admit it. Well, let no one say Fandral of Asgard was a coward. He swallowed, accepted Hadovan's hand, and allowed the wizard to pull him to his feet. Fandral's sword flew into Hadovan's hand, and the wizard turned the handle towards Fandral.
You still have a lot to learn, Sir Fandral, Hadovan said. You fight well, but not well enough.
I have at least entered this slightly, Fandral said, smiling a little. Hadovan chuckled and raised his hand, with which he stopped Fandral's sword. To Fandral's shock, Hadovan's hand was uninjured.
I concentrated my magic into my hand and created a shield just above my skin. It requires a lot of concentration, but that way no blade can pierce my skin.
Fandral forced down a swallow, his guts filling with lead. He realized very well that he was nowhere near Hadovan's level of skill. Now he understood why Hadovan was Thor's chosen. He took a step back and bowed lowly to Hadoven, who raised an eyebrow at him. I offer my sincere apologies, Mage Sigerson. I have offended you by underestimating you. I see now that I was wrong. I ask for your forgiveness. Fandral was surprised when he heard Hadoven laugh quietly. He raised his head and felt a shiver run down his spine when he found himself target of an understanding gaze. You are forgiven. If you wish, we can measure our strength against one another again one day. Hadoven offered his hand to Fandral, and he accepted it. The warrior of Asgard was not overly surprised at the strength of Hadoven's handshake. He could now see that Hadoven was indeed strong. I shall be honored. They looked at the gathered people when they heard them clapping.
That was indeed very educational,
Odin said as the group walked over to the two newly made friends.
I have known that you are strong, Mage Hadoven, but seeing that one of our best warriors didn't manage to put a scratch on you, I realize now that my knowledge is lacking.
Hadoven blushed and bowed his head. You flatter me, my king.
Please, Hadoven, you are our son's destined.
Frigga spoke, gifting Hadoven with a motherly smile.
I realize that we have just met, but I hope that one day you shall come to call us mother and father.
Hadoven's breath hitched in his throat at Frigga's words. I don't know what to say. He breathed out and looked at Thor when the god of thunder wrapped an arm around Hadoven's waist and leaned down to kiss the mage's forehead.
You do not need to address us as father and mother right away, Hadoven.
Odin spoke, and Hadoven looked at him.
But as my lovely wife has said, you are our son's destined. Unfortunately, we have lost one son. I realize that I have made many mistakes in my long life. I do not plan to repeat them. I can see that you love Thor, and I can see he loves you just as much. I shall be more than proud to call you my son as well.
Hadoven's heart was beating loudly in his ears, and he was blinking back tears. His throat was closed up, and his hands were shaking. He started, but choked up. I'll be happy to call you my father and mother. I'm honored that you consider me good enough to be considered your son. He spoke in a raspy voice. Odin and Frigga smiled at him, and Thor hugged him tighter.
Come, dinner must have been served by now. We should go to the dining room. We have much to talk about,
Frigga said, and they moved for the dining room. Thor stopped when he felt Hadoven hesitate.
What is it, then?
He asked when everyone left the great hall. I can't believe that your parents accepted me, Hadoven whispered. He moved closer to Thor, wrapped his arms around Thor's waist, and buried his face in Thor's strong chest. Thor smiled lovingly and wrapped his arms around Hadoven.
I knew they would love you as soon as they met you.
Thor spoke with his face buried in Hadoven's sweet-smelling hair.
You are the most beautiful creature in all the realms. You are beautiful both inside and out.
Hadoven shivered and Thor smirked.
And you have no idea how much I want you right now.
I missed your touch as well, Hadoven whispered and raised his head. Thor cupped Ven's cheek and pulled him into a scorching, passionate kiss. And Hadoven fisted his right hand in Thor's cape on one broad shoulder, moaning into the kiss.
We shall join them, or I shall take you in this very room.
Thor growled against Hadoven's lips. Later, Hadoven murmured and winked at his destined, and Thor chuckled lowly and followed after Hadoven.
Yes, later.
Hadoven sighed as he stood on the balcony of his and Thor's rooms. The night sky shone above him, and a warm breeze ruffled his hair and clothes. He was dressed in light white sleeping pants, and his shirt was unbuttoned. He dyed his hair at the top of his head, and it was still damp from the bath he took after dinner. Stories were exchanged during dinner time. Both sides spoke of recent events. He chuckled when he remembered the look on Fandral's face when Thor said that Hadoven was greatly weakened during his stay with Loki. Fandral said that he felt even worse since Hadoven managed to defeat him quite effortlessly, even when he wasn't at full strength. Ben sighed again and smiled when he remembered the kiss on his cheek he received from Frigga as they parted for the evening. Their short stay in Asgard had been wonderful by now, and Hadoven truly could imagine himself staying here forever once everything settles. A life with Thor, Ben thought as he crossed his arms on the golden railing of the balcony and looked at the sky. Such a short time ago, I didn't even believe it possible. Thor shivered when he quietly came out on the balcony and looked at his lover. He leaned against the door frame as he observed Ven, his lightly tanned skin accentuated by white clothes, starlight dancing in raven strands free of any bounds, and eyes glimmering like jewels full of mysteries and secrets far out of anyone's reach. Hadoven appeared to be at ease for the first time in a while, and Thor could see the small, calm smile on Hadoven's lips even though he was looking at his profile.
"You're oddly quiet,"
Hadoven said and looked at Thor. The god of thunder felt his need rise at the expanse of revealed skin his lover was showing now that he turned to face him. Thor pushed away from the doorframe he had been leaning on and started to prowl over to Hadoven, licking his lips at the sight of the shiver which wrecked Hadoven's lithe body. The wizard's mouth watered when he saw Thor's naked torso. His sleeping pants hung low on his hips, and Thor moved like a predator stalking his prey.